Yeah, I'll play the theme song and we'll go from there.
Theme songs.
Theme
Yay.
song.
Hey,
You go. Oh,
Anthony
that's
says
gonna be
hi.
so.
I did an episode for
There we
him
go.
the other night.
Sweet.
We're live.
Chris was looking at his phone when he's supposed to do the introduction. Welcome to Esoterica, the podcast, the live stream. Hi, I'm Aaron Christian.
And I'm Chris Schultz, and I thought I'd hear the theme music, so I apologize.
Did you not hear it?
I didn't. No.
Oh, well, then nobody heard it. I enjoyed it myself. It's still playing right now. Well, that's okay. We had some fun pretending like that was going on. So, Chris, you take it away for a second while I fix that problem.
So, welcome to our Sunday night live stream. Tonight we have a very special guest with us. We have Erika Miley, who is a what's your proper title? Because I've just been saying the sex therapist, but I think there's more to it than that.
I'm a mental and sexual health therapist, and I'm a PhD candidate in clinical sexology. So, every letter I can get behind my name, I'm trying to get.
Awesome. So we asked Erika to come on the show tonight. Our jam is we like to shine a light on the obscure and the unusual, and we are hoping our audience would chime in too with questions and thoughts on the subject of sex. So
fantastic. I'm really excited about it. And you all sent me some questions in advance, and the two questions that were there could fill up the entire time, I think.
So we want to give everyone the time. If you're watching now, we'll mention this a lot through the next few minutes here, but in the description of this episode, it gives a little link. You can ask some anonymous questions that they should auto-populate on the form, Erika, that you have as people ask questions. Or if you feel comfortable enough, you can ask them right here as well. And, we'll relay those to you also.
Fantastic.
And that's that. So.
Okay, we'll hang out and look for questions. I feel like I need to share the stream.
Let's see. I just went on Facebook. We got 4 people in so far.
Woohoo! Howdy, folks.
So Darren, do we want to start off with one of the questions that we received while we're waiting for people to warm up?
Either that,
sure.
I can also tell people a little bit about my background, just so that they know that I'm not making it up.
I think that's a good idea, because the bio we have on our website only says so much. So,
Exactly. So I went to school for psychology. So for a very long time, especially when I was growing up, I thought I really wanted to work for the FBI. And my wonderful mother took me to college classes with her because she was in law enforcement. And luckily I got to see what that work actually was like, and not what you think it is or what TV shows you it is. And so I very quickly got a sense okay, this is not what I want to do. So I still majored in psychology, and eventually went to graduate school I have my master's in clinical mental health. And I figured out very quickly, especially doing social work, that I really wanted to help people break down the toughest stuff in their heads. And because of that really pointed me to sex, because every single person that I would say a good 95% of the people I've worked with across my career has had some issue, had some shame, had something about their sexual health. So that really, and with the help of, did y'all ever see the show Talk Sex with Sue on the Oxygen Network, way back in the day? She was an older lady. She had an amazing show. People would ask her questions, and she was just like a chill old lady, answering sex questions on the TV. And I remember being a young person going, whoa, that's a cool job.
How do I get that
job? So here we are.
And it's nice having being able to have some sort of dialogue about something it's so difficult for a lot of people to talk about. And I think that's why when we advertised that we were having you on and we were going to do this, that we set up this anonymous place, because people have a hard time maybe on Facebook. They don't want to put their name to question they have. So, ask it anonymously. And actually just now we got one more question while sitting here. So if I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions and you feel uncomfortable about anything, but you want to pop it out, esotericthepodcast.com/sex therapist. And has an anonymous form, they can fill it out. So,
yes.
All right. Off my soapbox for that.
Hey, it's fantastic. It does. It happens usually when I've done trainings or things in the past. I usually make some way for people to ask anonymous questions, because our culture, especially in the United States, is really, 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 and I can swear, right?
Oh yes, please.
Fucked up around sex. Really, it really, really is. There's a lot of people in this world that have never gotten any sex education or any kind of understanding about what pleasure is. And most of the time, any sex education people got, it's a plumbing lesson, right? That's one of my mentors whom I love. Shout out to Ricky Siegel if he's listening. But it's me and my colleagues who do this work, we have oftentimes more sex education than your average doctor. So the medical field is notorious for not having enough education around sexuality and sexual health. And especially those who are in it's luckily now changing, but those who are in the OBGYN fields, notoriously poor sex education, and they work with oftentimes how we all get here. So we've got some issues culturally around sex.
Yeah, it's a big hang up. One of the things that I was wondering is, Aaron and I were talking about this. So I'm trying to think of how to phrase this question.
We can always clean it up later.
So kinks and fetishes are cool. That's something that everybody has. Is there a line that's you're able to distinguish between when it's healthy and when it becomes pathological?
Fair. I think this is a great question. And I think I want to start with what you first said, which was that kinks and fetishes are cool and we all have them. I think that on its own is something that a lot of people are unaware of, that kink is, and our fantasies about BDSM and group sex, which are actually the two most common searched themes of not only just pornography, but of fantasy that people are looking for. And that's with the definition of group sex being more than two. And BDSM can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So I just want to say that it is far more common and that we're all searching for it on the internet. So that being said, early in my career, I worked a lot with those who have committed who have experienced sexual assault. And I've also worked with those who have perpetrated sexual assault. So there is a line, and culturally we have decided that the line is when you have attraction to those who are underage. Also, we have decided, and rightfully so, that consent, when you cross the boundaries of consent, that is also a cultural line that, even though we have laws about it, we're all also fantasizing a lot about pushing power and control boundaries. So yes, of course, there is a line, and we've decided culturally, and not necessarily equally across the board, especially in the United States, every state is a little different in the laws that exist. We could be here all night just talking about that. So I when it comes to the individual, though, oftentimes what I'm working with somebody on is them accepting something that they find to be erotic. And most of the time, it's something they have a lot of shame about, but is actually incredibly common.
Yeah, I think that's part of the that misconception is, you're in your own headspace. It's
Yep.
hard to think about other people, and this is something that we don't talk about. So you could be sitting there, well, I find Minnie Mouse attractive. Oh God, there must be something wrong with me, but so do a million other people.
Yes. And then you figure out, oh wait, I'm not the only person that likes this. I'm not the only person that likes to dress up like this. I'm not the only person that thinks this specific thing is really interesting. Once we start to normalize those things for people, the shame, when we start dealing with that shame, it's quite liberating for most folks.
And I remember, so I'll ask this too. Like, it's been, let's see, probably it's been 20 years since I was in high school. When I first went to college, I was going in for funeral service. So part of that curriculum was grief therapy and abnormal psychology.
Yeah.
And I remember when we touched on fetishes, the
Mhm.
way it was taught at that time was that a fetish is when your arousal is replaced, but instead of being aroused by, I guess, the genitalia of the opposite sex, an object takes the place of that, and that's the abnormal psychology of it. Is that
Nah.
correct?
That's pretty much that's pretty, we've pretty much so far. I mean, let's be real. We don't have a lot of excellent funding for sex research. So it is still a field that has so much research to be done. One, but two, we know that kinks can exist. You can be completely attracted to a vulva and how it looks and smells and tastes and all of the things, and you can also be really attracted to seeing that vulva in leather. Our sexuality is more complex than we would like to make it. We would love to put people in very specific boxes because then we've got them figured out. So when I say those boxes don't really work for us as humans. And the other crazy thing is that a lot of our sexuality can change. And I mean sexuality, not necessarily like our orientation. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about like our sexuality, the things that arouse us, change over time.
Mhm.
We are creatures who love novelty. We love it. We love it. I mean, if Amazon is any example of our need to buy novel things a lot, or the internet or YouTube or any of those wonderful video games, wonderful examples of the things that we use to create novelty. We do it in sex too. And sometimes we might be aroused to something really, really for maybe even a long time, but a lot of times we'll change and shift that narrative just so that we can create something even a little bit more new.
Mm-hmm. Keeping it fresh.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny. I was just thinking of years ago, I maintained a blog, which was called Secret Thoughts of Stuffed Animals. Every now and then I would look at the analytics, and I cannot tell you how many people on military bases around the world were searching fucking stuffed animals on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I felt terrible that they came to my blog looking
like, I didn't provide what you were looking for. Damn. Honestly, like, I mean, especially like stuffed animals, many times for many people, their first encounter with some type of masturbation or that kind of sensation is with a stuffed animal.
That makes sense. It's in your bed with you.
Well, in our early, I think we think we want to push off any of the conversations about sexuality and things until people are teenagers or when they're in puberty, when in reality our body is developing, not necessarily in the way of like sexual arousal the way we understand it as adults. When we're children, our genitalia and our nerve endings are developing. And as those nerve endings switch on, as we continue to develop in our brain, which is the biggest sex organ we have, as that develops, we are constantly like exploring our body parts. If you've ever watched tiny children, they are constantly touching their entire body, putting their feet in their mouths, putting their hands in their mouths, elbows, everything. And then as they get a little older, they start exploring genitalia. And it's not because of some sexual thing. It is because that body is developing and it is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. And parents are the ones often, caregivers are often the ones who like smack a baby's hand or smack a kid's hand and say, don't touch that, that's ugly. Or don't touch that, that's bad. Don't touch that, that's gross.
Yeah, but that sense of shame starts early.
Oh yeah. Early. So every one of my answers is going to be long-winded and I apologize.
That's
okay, because we're short-winded people. So, so we were talking a little bit about kinks, and there are a lot of things that, you know, I kind of put myself in a situation. I go, that's not something I don't understand how you would find that that's something that you like. Do you find a lot of it comes from people figuring out what kind of kinks they like, comes from maybe a fantasy or something like that? Or, you know, it's just there's some really things out there that stray far from what I think a lot of people would consider normal. And I'm curious as to how somebody discovers that that's something that they're into, if you understand my question.
Absolutely. How does somebody get into the things that they're into? And especially if they're deemed as abnormal by what would be considered normal culturally. First and foremost, we have a really hard time culturally deciding what normal is. So I want to say that first, but second, like oftentimes it seems what we find from not only just our clients, but the research is that many people who develop maybe a kink will develop some of that perhaps in early adolescence. And the reason is, if you think about it, what is happening to our brain during adolescence? It is the largest period of time other than infancy that our brain is doing so much developing. So no other time in your life does your brain develop that fast. And then you add hormones to that. It's like gasoline. We actually, it's kind of interesting. There's some research around when like Facebook came out that there was a rise in people going back to like early adolescent partners. So first boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the title they had at the time, and then rekindling those relationships and ending whatever relationship they were in as an adult because of that. And essentially what they had found was that when we encounter those people, our brain and body responds to them as if we were that adolescent again. So it again creates this very large sense of novelty and euphoria and amazing brain chemicals that our brain really, really, really likes. So if you think about like your early formative sexual years, like that's all fueled by puberty. So it can definitely really tie you to something that you find arousing. Say when you were young, especially some of the generations that are coming up now, and I would say even my generation, I'm 36. So when I was growing up, it was the wild west of the internet, right? Like the algorithms didn't look like they do now. When you would search for a book, you would get porn. Now that's not necessarily the case. So we have generations of young people who are now adults who were essentially raised on pornography, and that was their sex education. I'm not saying porn is responsible, not that at all. We've been making porn since the minute we could make porn. We've been drawing porn on caves. Like, we will find a way. If there's new tech, we're going to find a way to do something sexual with it. So I'm saying all this to kind of just give this like etiology of where a lot of oftentimes what we would consider a kink or a fetish or something we might consider abnormal might come from. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it does come later as someone exploring their sexuality as an adult. They start to really want to understand themselves. And I can't tell you how many people come to my office, which this is what you see right now is what my folks see. My entire practice has been online for quite a while now. And it comes down to this want to explore their sexuality and absolutely deconstruct the shame that they had built up around it. And many of my colleagues who work in this field, they really do. They would, I might piss off some listeners. The religiosity that in some of their lives can be really responsible for the deep shame that they have around sex. I can't tell you how many couples have come into my office. They're trying to explore themselves sexually, and they run into a roadblock of shame that comes from way, way back before they were together. So one partner wants to explore spanking and wants to explore maybe using some soft impact play. And impact play is like spanking or like using like a light flogger or anything that would impact the body. And they will come up against this like old shame, and we'll have to work through it before that they can even engage in some of the things that they would really like to try with their partner, even though they know their partner is a safe person to try it with. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And that seems almost dangerous to me. Like I've noticed, I think when people repress a desire or an emotion, it tends to squirt out in destructive ways.
I tell people it's like trying to put a garbage can over a geyser. It works for a second.
It's going to look ugly when it stops working.
Yeah.
Oh, good Lord. And do you think, so with the proliferation of pornography on the internet, is that problematic or better? Like, I know back in my day, I'm 47. So when I was just coming into puberty, it was magazines.
Right.
Or if you managed to get your hand on a VHS tape or trying to watch a scrambled channel on cable. And you were
the Playboy Hustler War days.
Yep, right. Oh, I think I saw a booby. Compared to now, like you can just go down a rabbit hole doing a search and find anything. Do you think that's better, worse, or just like part of who we are?
I do think that this really does. I really do think it is. I do think it is part of who we are as humans. I think we do, like I mentioned before, we have created so many types of different technology, right? Like from the time when we were drawing on caves to when we figured out we could write on some sort of parchment and we wrote sexual stories, we drew sexual images, and we gave that to each other. I think pornography, the way that, I kind of, the way I talk about it is with my clients is I say sexual material, because there's so much of it. There's written word, there's audio, there's visual, there's tons of different types. And now we've even figured out how to create sex toys that work at a distance. You could be in a whole different country on your app, buzzing your partner's underwear. Like, I just think that that's the coolest thing in the entire world. Like the advancements and our ability to connect with each other in such, even if it's a partner that's a brief partner, it is still a connection and people find value in it. I think when we hit a new kind of technology, there is always the population of humans that is going to be afraid. It doesn't mean that there are people in this world who do not have problems with sexual things, right? I've worked with those who've committed sex crimes. I absolutely have worked with people who have done really, really heinous things. But does that mean that the rest of us are screwed? No. The percentage of people who are likely to do that is actually really small. The media would definitely rather have you sensationally believe that every person who's ever committed a sex crime is a monster waiting for you outside of a bush and is going to get you. When in reality, that's not really what it's like. And most of the time when those crimes are committed, they're not people who are actual pedophiles. People who are actual pedophiles are people who are actually aroused to a prepubescent body. So, and the way that we talk about people who have committed these crimes is they're all pedophiles, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If we could walk down this path, and we could be here all day. So I will.
Well, it actually brings us to a question that Aaron and I were debating about whether or not we were going to ask you, and I think it's good to ask. So
Yes.
we have a mutual acquaintance who
Mhm.
was arrested last year for sexually exploiting children online.
Mm-hmm.
And his shtick was he was catfishing on Snapchat, posing as a girl, would extort pictures from these boys, and then because he knew personal information about them, would extort more.
Yes.
Obviously, he's got some issues,
Mm-hmm.
but we've been wondering, is that more of a power play than a sexual thing? He did it to like 400 people. The kid didn't waste any time.
Right.
And he did collect pictures, but it seems,
Mhm.
Knowing him, it seems to us at least that like there may have been more of a bit about power over somebody's sex.
Absolutely. It is. It's not to say that they're not people who are aroused to consent crossing and to boundary crossing. But again, that lives in the world of power and control. It does have to do with sex. We have to work with people who have committed sex crimes about sex because we have to help them understand, oh, okay, you've probably got some sexual narrative that is more sexy or maybe a little less sexy than whatever this narrative is. If we use the example of this person, maybe that narrative was like, I'm doing something taboo, I'm getting to hide, I'm not that I'm going to connect with this person, I get the upper hand. So that could have been the narrative all by itself, with or without the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
The internet, y'all folks, like the internet allows us to now have evidence of the things that many humans were doing, maybe even before the advent of the internet, right? Like extortion and power and control and telling somebody you're someone you're not. That narrative is incredibly way more common than we would like to admit it to be as humans.
Yeah. Thanks.
I told you. We're going to get in deep tonight.
Aaron, you want to try one of our questions that we got? So I could talk and completely forget that we got some.
I mean, I can answer. Erica, I don't know if you have them with you. You can see what I sent you, but I don't know if it's easier if you want to do it your own pace. What's there? There's 3 now, and I don't know if there's an order you want to do them. So I don't want to just blindside you with.
Let me pull them up on my phone, because the first 2 that you got, they were both very, very good, and I was like, these are great questions. We'll get right into it. Let me find it. Let's do this quicker and just search your email address rather than try to be here for 5 years searching my inbox.
And if it's a small audience right now, but if you haven't yet and you have questions, esotericapodcast.com/sex-therapist, it'll ask your question. It'll go straight to the sheet that we're all looking at automatically, and we'll go from there.
Okay. I definitely want to tackle this first one, because I think that this is probably more common than people would necessarily believe. And I know you're a show that's about like taboos, and I feel like all night I'm going to be saying like it's more common than you think.
That's good. That's a good thing.
The question is an urge to be naked in inappropriate places but not seen normal? This is called exhibitionism. Yes, it is incredibly common. This is actually, because if you think about it, think about what comes with wanting to be naked and maybe getting caught. There's the element of the chase. There's the element of getting caught. There's the element of doing something that crosses some boundaries. So you're hitting every piece of like in your brain, you're hitting these like super novel narratives Now, should you do this? No, because you can get arrested. Don't do this. Maybe
But it's
you
fun.
can. You can. There are definitely safe ways to be able to engage in these kinds of fantasies without crossing the boundary of what will get you in prison. So you could role play with a partner, or maybe you could find somebody, maybe around, for those of you who are not familiar, there's a great website with a community called FetLife that you can find somebody to actually kind of reenact something like this if you're trying really, really hard to create the idea that you are crossing boundaries, which to our monkey brain, it doesn't take a lot for us to get the idea and still create those feelings on the inside of our heads. Now, when folks get into trouble is when they convince themselves that if they do it this one way, will they get whatever orgasm or get whatever they're trying to get out of it. When in reality, when I'm working with my clients, and when I was working with those who have actually committed this specific sex crime, because it is illegal in many states to go out into public and flash people, or go out into public and like video. I had a couple clients who had like videotaped people in the bathroom. So, which is more like voyeurism, which is when you watch someone else. But you can create this in different ways. So if your highest arousal is like, I'm going to break the law, I'm going to go flash a group of bystanders, that's your like 10 fantasy. Okay. So, all right, I could see that. Well, what is 9? What is 8? What is 7? What is 6? What is all along that arousal marker that you could do that then also keeps you out of jail? If that makes sense. I feel like
how far can you go before it becomes illegal?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And not cross consent boundaries. Because
Yes.
sometimes even when we cross each other's boundaries, it may not be, that specific boundary cross may not be illegal, but it's far better if you leave a partner better than you found them. So it's good to negotiate all of this before you attempt it. So find a partner who's game. You can set up a scene, and then maybe they catch you being naked somewhere you're not supposed to. Maybe it's the kitchen and not outside.
Definitely better.
I mean, if you've got a lot of land and you're in the middle of nowhere, I mean, do you? But in the middle of a busy street, not so much.
Not a good idea.
Especially if you're in the southern states. So I'll check out some of these other questions here. Okay. It says, hi, Erika. Thank you for taking questions. Of course. It's like my favorite thing. I am asexual / sex phobic, but have a significant other who is not. Any tips for making it easier? Okay. First and foremost, come see someone like me. Sex therapy is excellent for this. Desire discrepancies, that's what we call them. So somebody wants more sex and the other person maybe wants less sex. Desire discrepancies can be helped, in some cases not alleviated. So if you as a person are identifying that you are asexual, sometimes if my couple, say I have a couple in front of me, or even a throuple in front of me, one person really, really likes to have sex maybe 3 or 4 times a week. One person really would rather have sex maybe once or twice a year. And I'm saying person because people would love to make this gendered. People would love to say, well, one must be a woman or one must be a man. When in reality, we see this across gender lines. It doesn't matter what gender you are. We see varieties of people and their interest in sexuality. So if someone is asexual and they have a partner who is more sexual, that may be something that you have to negotiate with them. And here's the thing, if you're sex phobic, it may be that you negotiate between you and your partner, opening up the relationship so that that partner can have the sex life that they are wanting to have. And if that is not on the table, then a negotiation between the two of you about maybe having a sexless relationship. And if that partner who wants sex more often can live with that or not. That making sense for everybody sitting in front of me?
Making sense to me.
Compromise.
As much as you can. I mean, this does happen. I've definitely encountered people who they have ended up in relationships this way. And it isn't necessarily that someone has less desire because something has happened. They are truly much closer on the asexual spectrum. So their interest in sex is less. So if that's the case, do you allow for your relationship to be open so that you can maintain this relationship with your partner? And then allow your partner to be able to meet their sexual needs the way that they need to, maybe in other relationships.
And I would imagine for a lot of couples, it's going to be a difficult discussion to get to.
Woo! Yes.
You know, I think if you look at the statistics on failed marriages, people are finding alternative solutions to talking to one another.
Oh, there's an entire subreddit called Dead Bedrooms.
Oh, jeez.
Mm-hmm.
That's sounds suspiciously like a segue to a similarity to the question that follows that too.
Oh, the third question. Yes. I
Yeah.
keep putting my phone down as if I don't have more work to do. I'm just like,
I just thought that was a perfect segue. I didn't want to let it go.
Oh, you're totally right. It is a perfect segue. Okay. How do you overcome a cold bedroom or a dead bedroom in a long-term relationship? Therapy. Because usually it's not only sex is incredibly important in these dynamics. And as a sex therapist, I work on that immediately with the couple. But often when people do go to therapists, just like in any other field, many therapists are not trained to work with issues around sexuality. So sometimes people will go to couples counseling and they won't ever talk about sex, which blows me away. I don't understand. I don't get it. Like, you're working with a couple or other relationship type. Sex is a part of that. You need to be able to work on that. But that's why my job exists. So when it comes to a relationship, oftentimes there are dynamics that lead to a cold bedroom. The most common one that I hear from my clients is that they've become parents, and they've become parents to each other too. And that is the least sexy thing in the entire world, is when you feel like you are a parent to your children or a parent to your spouse or both. The minute you become that, those power dynamics change is the minute the sexual relationship starts to diminish, maybe even to nothing. So I encourage people to move towards touch slowly. So increasing touch, having conversations about touch, and then also having conversations about how did we get to this place of resentment? Because usually both people have pretty significant resentments of each other for something or another.
I would imagine that's a situation where it just kind of builds and builds and builds if you don't address it.
Yep. It becomes a teapot that then is overspilling. And so we have to figure out ways to let steam out of the teapot a little at a time, and then eventually take it off the burner.
Which, and on the opposite end of that, we've seen a rise in our culture. I'm guessing recently, the whole incel movement.
Woo!
And I hate to call it a movement because I feel like that's giving it legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And as a man, I apologize that people even exist. But it seems like that's born out of the same place. But
I mean, it can be. A lot of times incels are born from the place of like the being isolated, oftentimes being depressed, oftentimes being or being incredibly anxious and not knowing or understanding why, and then finding some sort of community online that then makes you feel less alone. And when you do that, it starts to reinforce the beliefs, even maybe no matter how problematic they are. If you have a community with you reinforcing those beliefs, to stay within the community of acceptance, you will do anything.
Mm-hmm.
That includes harming others. I
Mm.
mean, that's we know that from lots of historical factors. We've seen people actually go toe to toe with law enforcement over their beliefs, right? Like, not saying that law enforcement is handling good things well it historically, but like, I'm just thinking of things like Ruby Ridge. I'm thinking of things like I went to college in the Northwest, so a lot of these stories are cultural stories. And when there's a community of people, when you feel like you might lose that community, you're willing to do things that otherwise you may not have been willing to do otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So like, a lot of times when I've worked with those who maybe identify themselves as incels, there is a you don't understand me, one, and two, there is a sense of sexual entitlement. So I'm not just talking about entitlement like I'm owed. It's you owe me your body.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm.
And that is different. And it takes a significant amount of time to break down.
Yeah, I've theorized in my own like armchair philosopher way that maybe it's some of us are more evolved than others. Like that seems to me to be a reptilian brain way of thinking. Um, just looking at other animal species, animals are here, they have a purpose, and if you're
Yeah.
being denied that purpose, you get angry, and it's not a legitimate way to think, but to me that seems to be where that might be coming from. And
I mean, it could be, I guess, but I just really go back to that idea of isolation. When you don't have anybody around you checking your opinions,
mm-hmm.
what happens to you? This is why, I mean, I'm a podcaster too. I use social media. I have to do that with my show and all of those things. But like, when you live in an echo chamber, when you only watch one type of entertainment, when you watch or are involved in only one community, it doesn't allow for any other perspectives to challenge you. And that can absolutely help shape your brain into thinking things are black and white. Part of my job as a therapist generally is to help people regain flexibility of thought and challenging their insides. So I'm helping them understand that your point of view isn't all there is in the world, one, and two, more than likely your point of view is pretty tainted by your own brain's ability to believe what it sees in front of it. Our brain is a machine made to think. It is an association machine. That is what it does. That's why eyewitness testimony is so garbage. It's because our brain is made to be, if we're looking out at a jungle and we see a flash of a stripe, our brain will put the pieces together and say that's a tiger before we even blink a second time. But that's to keep us alive, right?
Right.
And because that's how our brain operates, like, it's very difficult for us to not get into like very small groups that make us feel safe, right? So if you think about that, an incel might feel really safe in a community of other people who are also echoing like hate and anger and isolation, and then taking that and externalizing it rather than looking inside and going, okay, I don't like how things are going in my life. How do I change my life?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
I worked in a prison. I'm internally optimistic. And I'm not being sarcastic about that, I promise.
I imagine you'd have to be.
Yeah.
But I've also seen, I've seen humans' capacity for change. People I never, ever, ever thought, before, especially before that. I've worked with the homeless population for a very long time, and just the capacity for change, not only just because we're treating a mental health issue, because a majority of our issues in this country when it comes to prison populations and when it comes to our homeless populations are revolving around mental health. And there's not too many countries that have gotten the handle on that yet. There's only a very few, and the Nordic countries keep just showing us up. Their idea of prison in some of the Nordic countries is that your loss of freedom is the consequence, and that's where it ends. So you have access to education all the way up through your PhD. You have access to be able to get the mental health treatment because of the massive amounts of trauma you've experienced in your life at the hands of other adults. Our ability to change is, it always blows me away. And I think that's why I'm eternally optimistic.
I think that's what we're missing here. There needs to be a more chance to address those mental issues.
Yeah.
So, I would think the same with homophobia and transphobia. There's this fear based on ignorance, and we're in this catch-22 where it's a subject that people are not comfortable talking about.
Right.
How do we just get past this?
I think when you start to open up your perspective. So therapy, one. I'm always going to say that. Therapy. But also when you start spending time with people who are different than you, it really does help shift your perspective of the world. Mm-hmm. If you can start to spend time in places that you maybe are scared to spend time, but then you start to get to know humans as they are, then you start to understand, oh, okay, this is something that is not to be afraid of.
Yeah. A lot of the guys that, I've worked in different places. I've known guys who are homophobic, and it always seems that their biggest fear is that gay guys are thinking like they do. Mm-hmm. And they know what pigs they are when it comes to women. So they're assuming that guys are thinking that about them, which at the end of the day, I mean, other than the fact that people are more than the sum of their parts.
That's right.
What's the big deal? Isn't it flattering?
I mean, wouldn't it be great, for someone to be able to go, hey, thanks, I'm not interested, but that made me feel good. I appreciate that. It doesn't.
With the military, if you're in a combat situation, if the guy behind me likes my ass, then he's going to be looking out for my ass. So
yes, absolutely. And here's I think there is this belief that being gay or being trans can get on you, it's transmissible in some way, or if that, I mean, this also does come back to, I mean, we could be here all night just talking about this, about what masculinity and the idea of masculinity does culturally to men. I mean, I'm not going to speak for the two of you, but what do you think for the two of you, masculinity and the idea, cultural idea of what it means to be a man has done to the two of you?
It's complicated.
Just throw it right at us.
I told you. Tell me your life story.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I can say up until probably the last 10 years of my life, most of my close male friends have been gay, because there's something there isn't that innate competition, that pissing contest that most men seem to have each other. Because I could give a shit. I'm not into that.
It sounds like there's a presence of, one, a mature adult relationship, and two, that's one. Two, being able to have a certain level of acceptance of yourself.
Yeah.
Because when you can accept yourself, the need to compete with people that you're really close to starts to really diminish.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So what does it mean to be a man? What is that cultural, what is the cultural belief to be a man? What is the expectation?
From what we've
It's
seen in the last 2,000 years, my answer would be to fuck everything up and then blame
Okay.
someone else.
mm,
It's women's fault, damn it. You know.
oh, the point in the finger game. My gosh.
Mhm.
Yeah, we've done a, if it's been a man-centric society all along, we've done a piss poor job. So
There are things like there's like these tropes, right, of being a man. That you have to be strong. You have to be the provider.
Yeah.
You have to have a big penis, right? Like that's the expectation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had an ex-girlfriend that expected me all the time. I had to protect her. Anything else, anybody that crossed her, I had to fight. You have this expectation that you're supposed to be this guardian of everything. I'm like, I can't do all that for you. I'm sorry.
Ain't
Just
nobody
not
got
capable.
time.
I know.
Ain't nobody got time. My first question was like, okay, then what is it that she needs protection from all the time? Like, what is that? What is that fear?
And
What is
it
that
ended up being
paranoia?
herself. That's the thing. Yeah.
Fair, right?
Yeah.
But that expectation of being strong, being the protector, being the one standing in front, right? That is a constant expectation, right? Like you have to be, the only emotions you're allowed is anger, stoicism, and humor, right? That's all you're allowed. That's all you're allowed to show from the time you're little kids. But what all those expectations do is limit you, right? Like they put you in this very specific box of you have to perform maleness this way. And if you don't, you're there's lots of words and terrible words that they have used for men and gay men for years and years and years, because if you step outside of that box.
Yeah. It gets so confusing, and it's a confusing time we live in. I was just thinking recently, Billy D. Williams mentioned on Twitter that sometimes he identifies as female because, and I think I'm misquoting him, but the gist of what he was saying was, sometimes I want to put on a silk robe, sometimes I want to have a bubble bath. And while I heard what he was saying, my first thought was, do you have to identify as a woman to be that? Like, there's nothing wrong with a man that wants a bubble bath, or there shouldn't be. What's wrong with our society that you have to identify as something else if you like that? Like, why can't you just like it?
Right. And I think, and he had even, I think, because I love me some Billy D. Williams. He was even trying to talk about, because he's very, very into Jungian psychology. So he talks Billy D. Williams talks actually very well about, I say well because I'm like, you're not a psychologist and you're talking very well about Jungian psychology. I love it. But it is this idea of embracing those things that would be culturally identified as feminine and saying that this is a part of me too. And I can float between those two worlds comfortably. And does that need to change how you identify in the world? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you can just embrace that as part of you yourself.
That's a good point. And that's easier, I think, for people to come around on than changing fundamentally how we think about things. These tropes exist. You can't just undo them.
Exactly. And ultimately, when it comes to people who are actually trans, the number of humans that are actually trans is a small number. Much like the number of people who are actually gay, or who are actually however they want to identify, that number of people is fairly small. It doesn't mean that it's any less important, or that we as humans need to understand those parts of ourselves and not orphan parts of ourselves. Because the minute that we decide, I don't like that piece of myself, I'm going to get rid of it, is the minute that we're no longer being vulnerable. We're no longer being authentic even to ourselves. And I don't mean to use the word authentic in the strange cultural popularity authenticity has all of the sudden taken.
It's weird times we be living in.
Yes.
You said something that just now made me think. You talk about people that are actually trans or they're actually gay. There are a lot of people, at least that I know, that
Mhm.
I get the vibe from them, and maybe I'm not at all right about that, but
Mm.
the reason why they're identifying as gay or trans is to get the attention
Mm.
that they want to be along to something that's bigger than them. And I could be completely wrong, discredit them. So I'm not saying that I know that for a fact, but I could see that based on other behavior that they exhibit, that this could be something they want to be a part of. And is that something you see a lot at all with people that maybe, they, that's not, that's they have problems fitting in and they want to find a place to fit in where they're unique and they decide to do that.
That example, I don't
Mhm.
see much at all. Most
Mhm.
of the time, when someone is coming out, it's like for trans people, if they are transitioning and they are using hormones, there is an actual second puberty.
Mm.
So that is different than what I'm about to talk about with people who are like trying to understand who they are
Right.
attracted to. So say someone starts to understand like, oh, and admitting to themselves, I think I'm attracted to people who are of the same sex as myself. One, that's really scary to admit. Two, then you start to allow yourself to get into a community of other people who support you.
Mhm.
That might be the first time in your entire life where you felt like a whole person, or you might feel really, really excited about it. And so you might do some attention getting and behaviors
Yeah.
because you're finally feeling like you are your whole self. So that is much more like what I see. And
Mm.
a lot of times, so many of my clients who are older and they're in the gay community, they talk about being a baby gay and being excited. And it is like a second puberty. And you're going to try to go and be with everybody you can, not only just sexually, but like in relationships so that you can try on all these different things because you've
Mm.
finally taken the chains off. I mean, think about and maybe, this is a big ask. Like the first time you masturbated, you figured out this neat thing that you figure out this really cool thing that your body can do. And then what do you do when you're in puberty? You do it like every day, 5 times a day until you start to like accept like, oh, okay. Yeah, that starts to level out as you get older.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
I think it's probably more than likely something along those lines rather than
Yeah.
someone trying to get attention. And it's not to say that there are people who don't go to college and try to try things on, right? When they're in
Yeah.
college or they're in, especially if they go to work right into their early 20s or late teens.
Mm.
But most of the time when it comes to sexuality, it 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 it'll explode because of it, not because of
Mhm.
necessarily trying to get attention. It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
we won't try to wear clothes and stuff like that out in the world to try to get more attention. I mean, every human loves its version of the peacock, right?
Mm. Yeah, and the reason I asked something like that is, I'm in college, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
fairly a lot of people my age are trying to discover things about themselves. They're still fairly young. We're
Yes.
in their early 20s, and I think it would be an absolute shame if there are actually people out here in this world that are exploiting a community to make themselves actually feel good because they can't find other
Right.
ways.
Yes.
I mean, like you said, not to say maybe there's one or two three people in the world that do that, but I mean, I'd like to think that generally most of the time they're genuinely actual people that are going through these
Yeah.
things. And the second puberty, I think exactly the example that I think of is probably what it is.
What it would be wonderful if we lived in a world, and I think eventually we'll get there. There's that optimism. Um,
Smells
where
like
we get to where we're early in our sexual development and we are allowed to explore it all, where we're
Mhm.
allowed without shame to explore the things that we're excited about and want to connect with other people physically about, right? How cool will it be that day when people can do what they want to do in their sexual life. And people are just like, that's cool.
Yeah, take the shame out of it, for crying out loud.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times someone like who's college age, they just got into college, they've gotten a whole new sense of freedom. They've started to, they've gotten away from mom and dad. They're starting to explore themselves without those rules, without those boundaries. And they end up in my office because they figure out, oh, there's this thing I like sexually and I've never told anybody and I really want to do it again and again and I don't know how to feel about it. And then we start figuring out where the shame comes from. We figure out, oh, your parents never breathed a word to you about sex. And when they did, they told you something about the birds and the bees. And it was never talked about again.
Oh God, I remember. I love my parents. I have a good relationship with them.
Yeah.
I asked my mom, and she said her literal words were, "When a man gets excited and dribbles." So in my mind, I thought when you took a leak, you had to run and get those last few drops and put them inside a vagina to make it.
I mean, of course your brain was like, I'm trying to figure out what the
dribbles. What?
mean? It dribbles.
But the next day, there was a book on my bed. That's how I learned.
That's that story is the one I hear a lot. Is parents get real scared and they think they're going to fuck up their kid for the rest of their life. And so they tell them a few things that are terrible and then lay a book on their bed. And healthy parents do this, right? Like parents that didn't hurt their children do this. So like, I think with something we all do share, especially in the US, is our big lack of education around sex.
And in hoping to get to a place eventually where we're past that, I know like the trans community is one of the most at-risk communities.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for us old straight white guys? Like how do we support these people? How do we let them know we care? Like in scouting, just as an example, they had a knot that leaders could wear back when Boy Scouts would not allow gays or trans in the program.
Yeah.
And that changed, and they started allowing homosexuals in. So I had stopped wearing this ribbon, and one of the organizers I happened to meet, he said, you wear it to show your solidarity and so that someone knows you're an ally. And like, so and even for maybe people that wouldn't want to call themselves an ally, how do we show support or the willingness to understand? I
think this is a great question. And also, my husband's an Eagle Scout, and my son is a Cub Scout. So I'm very familiar. I think the first place to begin, especially in the world of having the internet, is go to YouTube and start educating yourself on what does it mean for a person to actually be trans. And then once you kind of have a little bit of an idea of what does it actually mean to be trans, and then if someone in your life or someone you know identifies themselves as trans, just say, hey, do you have any pronouns you'd like me to use? And then use them. Whatever the pronouns they've asked you to use them. And if you screw up, which you might, just say, I'm sorry, and then use the correct one without making a very, very large deal out of screwing it up. So use the pronouns. You screw it up, say sorry, use the correct pronouns. And then if it is a person that you're close enough to and you do have questions for them, ask permission before you go into asking questions. May I ask you some questions? What questions are okay for me to ask you? Because then you're allowing that person who's standing in front of you to give you boundaries. And every single one of us, no matter how we identify, our boundaries are often overlooked and crossed as it is. Think about going through your life, like how many people have accidentally stepped on a boundary of yours, even if it was physical space, right? Like somebody stepping into your bubble. So when you ask somebody for what their boundaries are, it gives them permission to tell you what they are. Also, do not ask trans people about their genitalia. That is super invasive and none of your damn business. I don't go up and ask random humans how much of their pubic hair they shave. Why would I ever ask a human being what kind of genitalia they have in their pants?
Oh my God,
It's none of my damn business.
I'm like legitimately going to go out tomorrow and ask every guy I meet, are you cut or uncut? Like,
and see how many looks you get of just abject horror.
Before I get my face punched in. It won't.
But I can't tell you how many times I've one of my trans folks, people misgender them and then don't apologize and then try to use the correct gender, use their old name, they in the trans community is called their dead name. Especially every time a trans person goes into like the medical profession, oftentimes it can be really, really traumatic, because there are many doctors in this world who will just absolutely ignore anything that has anything to do with being trans. So they'll just go by what's on the chart. And so they will misgender, and refuse. Some doctors will even refuse to work with those who are trans.
The capacity for humans to discount one another never ceases to amaze me.
Well, and the thing is that being trans is not new. That's something that I've definitely heard culturally. Well, this is just a phase. This is just something new. No, it's not. Go back and just if you need some history, YouTube is at your disposal, but also like go and look up what it meant, hundreds of years ago for someone to be a two-spirit person. What did it mean for someone to have visions, right? Like we have had lots and lots of things happening in our culture historically forever, and history is a cycle. And anybody who wants to argue with me, just go read some history books, or go pick your favorite history podcast. Lately mine's been The Dollop, because I can't listen to any history without a little bit of humor lately. It's just so dark.
So, Erika, if you want, there's one more question that I think popped up. I just noticed now.
Glad somebody's paying attention. I missed it. All right. Oh, why does someone like a golden shower? So, for those who don't know what a golden shower is, it's also known as water sports. This is when people like to use some sort of bodily fluid, usually urine, on another person. So this could happen in the bed. This could happen. A lot of times people start using, they start doing any kind of like urine play. They'll start that in the shower. So just a heads up for those of you out there who might have judgment about that. Actually, urine's pretty sterile. How many of us have, and don't say that you haven't, peed in the shower on your feet? You've more than likely given yourself a little bit of a golden shower and not even paid attention to the fact that you were doing it. Sometimes when I have clients that they like any kind of like scat play or urine play or water sports, whatever you'd like to call it, there's texture that has a lot to do with it. Temperature has something to do with it. Smell has something to do with it. It usually has a lot to do with the sensory experience of having some sort of like, especially with urine, because urine can be so warm because it's stored in the body, obviously. Now, that being said, there are people who like it for power and control reasons. Some people like to be urinated on because they see it as degrading. So they really enjoy being made to submit and be degraded and maybe called names and then peed on. So like, and before anybody judges anybody for wanting to be degraded or be submissive, we as humans play with power and control and power dynamics all the time. All the time. It's just some of us are more likely to admit that we play with it in a sexual way than others.
Seems like the bedroom is probably a more productive place to play power games than out in the somewhere else, you know.
I mean, we do it a lot. People do it at work with their coworkers. People people play with their friends with power and control. People like this power dynamics, being submissive or dominant, is something that we as humans have been playing with for eons.
So on the subject of golden showers and scats,
Hmm.
is a blumpkin a thing?
Okay, describe to me what a blumpkin is. You'd think I would know what this term is. It's probably an internet term. I should know.
Yeah, so apparently it's performing fellatio while someone is in the act of having a particularly smelly and explosive bowel movement.
I mean, you could. It would be kind of not always difficult. I'm thinking of biology here in the way of like it's very difficult to ejaculate and urinate because of how the vas deferens works.
Mhm.
It's also hard if you've ever tried to poop and pee at the same time. So it's also difficult to have an orgasm and have any of those bodily functions be happening at the same time. It doesn't mean that it's not possible. It does happen. Many of us have pooped and peed at the same time. But it can happen, and it definitely does on the internet, but most of the time when those kinds of things are happening, it is like somebody has like to give everybody a cultural reference, 2 girls 1 cup. They've put poop in a cup and then engaged in the have like, because it's oral sex when you have I like my hand motions, oral sex and then pooping. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
So ejaculating into the mouth and then pooping. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, or I think it's ejaculating in the mouth while you're pooping at the same time. So I guess I'm on the can and someone's going to town.
I mean, definitely possible. It sounds like a lot of work to me.
Yeah.
Personally.
I'll pull up the Urban Dictionary definition while we're talking about it. But
Urban Dictionary. Oh my gosh.
But it's one of those
just
things.
to see what society.
The first time I heard
says.
about it, I could. So I'm putting my mind there. I'm like, all right, I can see on the receiving end, maybe it's a prostate stimulation thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But on for the person giving it, I'm like, how'd you decide that you like that? Like, how do you walk in on your boyfriend after Taco Bell and you're just like, all right, I want to do this. I don't know.
Scat play in particular is one of the ones that people tend to become interested in, maybe even in puberty, around puberty. But it also can happen in adulthood, especially like the cultural example a lot of people are maybe aware of is like baby diaper play or people playing adults playing baby, and then sometimes even using scat play in addition to that. So, I mean, as long as everybody's on board and the consent is in place and everybody has made the agreement to be present for these kinds of activities, like have at it, man. Make sure you clean up well afterwards. If there's any open wounds, make sure that those are covered, because feces has lots of bacteria. So you do gotta be a little bit careful. You gotta be a little bit careful.
Not sterile.
And according to Urban Dictionary, there's nothing about climaxing in there. It's just yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, yes, definitely possible. And very smelly, and you might be into that. There are very many people who are into the things that challenge us as far as our senses go. So like there are tons of people who love like after workout sex, like super sweaty, super smelly, because they do, for whatever reason, that person is very aroused by body odor or that person's sweat, if that makes sense.
Just
So-
noticing on the sideline that our viewership jumped while we were talking about scat. So.
Oh yeah, people want to know. They want to know about these things, and many times they get too afraid to Google it.
Well, so after an hour, our questions are just coming in. We
Yay!
just got one asking, why am I so attracted to Asians?
Why am I so attracted to Asians? I mean, there could be lots of reasons for that. I'm trying to get the thing to refresh so I can see the questions too. There could be lots of reasons for that. Maybe you saw some Asian focused porn when you were a teenager and that was really, really great. And you put it in the spank bank and it was like the best thing ever. And so that's who you tend to be more attracted to. Now, that being said, we do have to be careful about how we fetishize race, right? Like the internet is full of fetishes. See, I've had a whole beer now. I can't say words. The fetishization of specific races, especially like, and not to bring up what the things that are happening in the world today, especially for Black people, that this is something that has been fetishized for so long, especially in American culture. Like the belief that every Black man has a large penis. That is a fetish of a race, and it's a stereotype. It's not based on what we know to be true based on science, right? So you could be attracted to Asians because you saw a lot of porn with Asians in it, and that tends to be your jam now. So I encourage you, watch lots of different kinds of porn, not just one.
There's no shortage out there.
I know. Lots of free stuff, lots of really good paid stuff too. Y'all pay your sex workers. That includes people who make pornography.
Now that's a question I had. Actually, I meant to think of that earlier. See, sex work largely in the United States is illegal. Prostitution,
Yes.
at least. And I contend it's the second oldest profession, but I always put funeral service first, but that's
Probably tied, honestly.
do you legalizing that? Do you think that would be a step towards a healthier?
Yes. Oh my gosh, we are so overdue. We're so overdue. There's other countries that have done this and done this really well. We've actually had this. It would really, really help us to tackle like the illegitimate parts of sex work, the sex trafficking, the people who harm human beings to use their bodies as currency. And then there are people who choose sex work, who enjoy sex work, who make it their lifelong careers, who help people who wouldn't otherwise be able to maybe access certain kinds of sexual experiences. I mean, we have so many stories, especially in my field, about people who had a disability and they've wanted to have specific sexual experiences and haven't been able to have them because of the people around them not believing that they deserved pleasure, and being able to seek that out from a sex worker and experience pleasure for the first time in a safe and in a safe way that someone is not abusing them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I absolutely believe that it should be legalized, and because then we can also make sure everybody's being safe. We can make sure people are tested. We can make sure people have access to healthcare. That's not a problem in the United States or anything.
No.
Especially now that we're finding COVID in semen.
God, yeah, COVID.
Oh yeah, I remember reading that article.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what doesn't COVID live in?
Please, somebody tell us quick.
Oh, it looks like we got another one.
Look at you! I'm so glad yours is.
Yeah, I keep refreshing it so that way we're not
keeping us honest over here. That's what you're doing.
So
Am I gay if I like my ass licked? Okay, so let's talk about this. Your anus does not have a sexual orientation. Your anus has nerve endings. Full stop. That it doesn't care. Most anuses, not all, most anuses like to be touched in some way, especially around the rim of the anus where there is the highest concentration of nerve endings for most people. So essentially for most people, from back to front, the nerve endings are spread out all the way up to essentially where our hip bones are. If you think about it this way, we all have the same parts, just in different configurations. So we have tons of nerve endings that love to be touched, licked, kissed, fondled, tickled. Just if you like eating ass, like make sure everybody's cleaned up and have a great time. Ask, check in with your partner. People think like consent equals yes or no. That's not it. Consent is along the whole way. Consent can sound like, hey, does this feel good to you? Do you like this? Would you like me to continue doing this? Do you like it when I do A? Do you like it when I touch B? That's all consent conversation.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems like if you can distill anything out of this, it's we need to have conversations.
Yes.
Communication is key.
Yes.
Aristotle once said there's
3 parts to communication. Yeah.
Oh, you're taking me back to I was a philosophy minor. You're taking me back.
That's organizational behavior class, the same thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
yay. So you're at school, right?
Yeah. Yep.
What are you going to school for?
Business management.
Business management. What do you want to do with it?
No idea.
Oh.
I hoping to just get a business degree and go into first thing I can get, and we'll go from there.
Fair.
So,
I mean, that's part of the exploration.
Yeah, exactly. I want to experience a little bit and figure out what I like, and by doing it,
Yes, and you're not going to do one job for 25 years. Those days are gone.
Oh, thank God.
I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up.
I mean, fair. I pretty much know what I want to be when I grow up, but I have a lot of other ideas that I would like to do too. So who knows?
I still have to grow up.
Adulthood's overrated, I think, for everyone.
Oh, absolutely.
My teenager is often saying, "Mom, can I just go back to being 5?" And I'm like, really? That is like the best year. Those are the best time of your life. You get to like hang out, play with Legos, eat food, take naps.
Yep. Not be responsible for yourself. That's what I miss.
Yes. No bills that you really have to pay. Yeah.
I just remembered having my first juicy juice the other day. I was thinking back.
See? I don't know if y'all watch Rick and Morty, but there's an episode where I'll distill it down. There's dragons, and one of the dragons has the hoard of what humans covet, and one of the things Rick pulls up is a high-speed ecto cooler. So it had Slimer on it on the front of it from Ghostbusters. I was like, oh man, you're taking me right back.
So we did get another question. It seems to me that would be a personal question for me to answer. So I'm going to let you decide if or how you want to answer that.
Let's see. What is my favorite thing to do in bed? I am a mom. Sleep. I think that is a misconception oftentimes, that sex therapists are like these sex crazed people. I am much more of a very curious nerd than I am a sex crazed person. I just am more like, oh, you like that? I want to know all that. I want to know all the things about that. Tell me everything that I could ever know about that thing. And then I move on.
It actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's curiosity,
I am a nerd through and through. For those who are, I'll show you some of my first. Some people may know who this is. Other people may not. Do either of you know who that is?
I feel like I should.
Yeah, with you there.
That's Deanna Troy from Star Trek Next Generation.
Oh my God. We just talked to Alexander Siddig a couple of weeks ago.
Are you serious?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So of course the counselor of the Enterprise needs to sit on my desk.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, so this is my philosophy brain, I can't help it. Gene Roddenberry valued therapy and psychotherapy so much that Troy was one of the only people that could challenge Picard. When he was being a dick and not resting,
Yeah.
she was the only one that could just like come to his face and be like, hey, you need to go sit your ass down. And if you don't, I'm going to make you.
And he usually listened.
Yes, he did. So putting somebody who has an outside view of you and puts your best interest before you do in a place of power on the Enterprise, I just have always thought that was cool.
Good stuff. And it seems like so we have a completely broken healthcare system in this country. So it's
Fuck yeah.
If that train is continuing to go down the track, there's no hope. But I've always felt, I went through therapy in my mid-20s. I struggled with depression for a long time. Turned out I had ADD, which explained a lot of why I was depressed, because I didn't know why my brain was working this way.
I mean, I think I married someone just like you. My husband has ADHD too. Eagle Scout, ADHD.
Yeah, you start doing all these things. You do podcasts because you like it. But anyway, so I've always felt since then that we have physicals every year, and we get our bodies checked out and our health.
Yeah.
Like, why are we not insisting that we have mental physicals every year?
Yes,
Get that
absolutely.
brain checked out.
Yes, every single year you should have a conversation with somebody like me. Absolutely. And you know what I think is even more crazy to me is that we do not insist as a country that our president is psychologically fit to govern. Like that we don't have a psychological testing done on every person who runs for president. I don't care who you are, I don't care what party you belong to. That should be a necessity.
Yeah, because no matter what your politics are, there's like objective standards that we should have.
Yes.
Measurable.
And there are things that we know about certain kinds of, like, we know things about what we call the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellism, and okay, it's going out of my brain because it's too late and my brain's like, go to bed. Anyway, there's the dark triad. I'll look it up in a second. But we know that people who are very high in the dark triad are more than likely not going to be able to handle the level of stress that is required of some of the highest offices in the United States. Mm-hmm. Those are things that we can account for. We can also account for if somebody has like an issue that actually they have hallucinations or they have delusions. We can say, hey, this isn't the job for you.
Yeah, find something else.
And then we can get them treatment and get them help, right?
If we were running the world, it'd be a better place.
Oh my gosh. I'd have a PowerPoint.
Well, Erika, I want to thank you very much for coming on tonight. It's
Absolutely.
about 9:30. We try to keep these things in a reasonable length. So I want to thank you very much for taking your time to,
of course,
to come in. I feel like my head shrunk and I feel like I've learned a lot.
Yes.
So to hell with our viewers. Thank you personally.
Yes. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to talk to two small time podcasters who don't know anything. So
y'all are great. Y'all are great. Can I tell them about my podcast really quick?
Yes,
is that cool?
Please do. Yes.
Yeah. So if you really enjoy sex nerdery, or if you just like catchy podcast jingles, mine is pretty catchy. It's
It is. It is very catchy.
Sex Talk with Erika Miley, and you can find it at Sex Talk with Erika or anywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, pretty much all the places.
Awesome, and we'll put a link up to it. What we usually do with our live streams, Aaron's our post production whiz. We'll throw it up, but we have a page on our website of all our live streams.
Fantastic.
So we'll have it up on there for viewing afterwards, and we'll link you up. Definitely check out Erika's podcast. I've listened to it. It's good stuff.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate y'all.
Yeah, the jingle is certainly catchy. And anybody who listens to our podcast this Wednesday, we have our episode coming out with reviewing Hobo Johnson. And this Friday, we have a Famous Folk episode, which we'll announce who that is on Wednesday.
Yay.
Yay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Erika. And
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
Have a good evening, everybody.
that's the word I was trying to say.